боротьба жінок за репродуктивні та трудові права, історія та сучасність, як змінилися вимоги та стратегії феміністичних і робітничих рухів, які виклики постають перед жінками в умовах глобальної економічної нестабільності та політичної реакції. Відповіді на ці питання дасть Даян Філі, американська ліва активістка, яка багато років працювала на автомобільних заводах Детройта, брала участь у профспілковій боротьбі, продовжує відстоювати права трудящих і малозабезпечених.
I'm welcoming everybody to the couple of events that have just happened or are about to happen. International Women's Day is coming up, and this is now going into the fourth year of the Russian war on Ukraine. And as Trump lines up with Putin, it's a moment of reflection and shock at the humiliation that President Trump and Vice President Vance and even Marco Rubio plotted last Friday when President Zelensky was in Washington, D.C. So I've been a socialist activist since 1960. That was my first demonstration. I really became a committed activist around the war in Vietnam. I was someone who became convinced that the slogan of "Bring the troops home now" was the correct one for our movement, because I understood that my own brother was drafted and was in the Navy, stationed off the coast of Vietnam, not because he wanted to do that, but because he certainly couldn't go to either Canada or to jail. And it was really seeing how our demonstrations were able to affect change in the American population, which didn't really know about where Vietnam was. And at the beginning, we didn't have that many troops involved. But of course, as the war grew and expanded, people became very aware, and we held many demonstrations. And because I was at that point living in San Francisco, I was able to go to the airport and greet GIs as they were coming back from Vietnam or as they were going to Vietnam. And at a certain point, I realized that they were telling me, first I didn't believe that they were telling me the truth. They said that they were voting about whether they were going to go out on patrol or not. And I thought, well, that's just what they're telling me. Then I discovered that the army was falling apart and that they had to end the war because the army was no longer willing. And that gave me an incredible message early in my life that social movements can bring change, and they also can transform how we think about things. Things that we don't think are possible become possible. And towards the end of the 60s, of course, a feminist movement arose, primarily around issues of reproductive rights. But also, I was involved in helping to set up the first women's studies class at San Francisco State, giving us an opportunity not to study in an academic way, but to really use our class as a community organizing. And I come from a Catholic background and therefore have very conservative ideas about all aspects of sexuality. I once thought, and this was when I was in high school, if God wanted you to have 12 children, who were you to deny God that right? You know, I mean, that's how crazy I was. So for me, being involved in the fight for reproductive freedom, which to me is not just around abortion and not just in opposition to sterilization abuse, but to the whole range of women's right to control our own bodies. And I was very much involved in the movement before the passage of Roe v. Wade. In fact, I will tell you, I was quite shocked when the Supreme Court decision came down in 1973. It was something we really didn't expect. And when I read the opinion, I realized this isn't good enough for us. It's not, yes, you have the right to have health care, and reproductive rights are part of health care, but they set up provisions, you know. All right, this part of they divided pregnancy into 3 semesters. Okay, for the first semester. And the second semester, maybe we have some questions. Third semester, no. That's not women's rights. But on the other hand, it made available to millions of women the opportunity to take control over our lives. And of course, the far right then began to try to, from the very beginning, try to both intimidate us. I remember when they would check the license plates of the people who were in the clinic, assuming they were having an abortion. They would find out what the names and phone numbers of those people were, and they would call. Do you know your daughter is having an abortion at this clinic? That's what they would say, and this is in 1973, 74, very early on. So they spent all those years finding one way or another to cut off that basic right. And one of the most successful was, of course, not allowing women under the age of 18 to have an abortion without going through many jumps. Well, over the years, they were able to have a number of restrictions, which, people thought, all right, they're reasonable. Of course, they always think it's reasonable if it's about somebody else's life. But when it's about your life, it's not so reasonable. But that was kind of the approach. And yet I realized that the Supreme Court had changed and that we were going to face a cutoff of Roe v. Wade, which happened, of course, a couple of years ago. And in the state that I live in, Michigan, we have an old 19th century rule that says no abortions. And in fact, in that previous period, a couple of doctors had been sentenced to prison for performing abortions. And there had been a big movement in Michigan. So I helped to organize a referendum that would put reproductive rights into our state constitution. And it's really a very good referendum because it deals with the whole aspect of pregnancy and sterilization abuse, even artificial insemination, a whole range of points about reproductive freedom, and not just one. And we worked to get that referendum on the ballot, which we had to get hundreds of thousands of signatures. And then we got 58% of the people who voted for that referendum. So that's in our state constitution. And it's since been used by several other states. And every state that's had a similar referendum has passed it, except for the state of Florida, because they changed the rules. They said you had to at least 60% of the people had to vote for it to pass. Not a majority, but 60%. They only got 58%. So they're going to have to try again. During that period of time, we had a lot of demonstrations in Detroit, which is where I live. We even shut down the tunnel that goes from Detroit to Windsor, Canada, for a period of time in support of our right to abortion. And since then, we've fought to get a number of the laws that are still on the ballot, or still on the that have been passed, that prohibit abortions in one way or another. One is 24. You have to register for an abortion 24 hours before you can have it. Now that may not be a problem for some people, but it is for others. It is for somebody who's working and has to arrange childcare and might be coming from another state. So we're trying to get rid of those laws, including the one that prohibits state funds from being used to help poor women get an abortion. So that's going on at this particular time. Although I will say, once again, the movement has somewhat receded in the state of Michigan. I keep in touch with other people who are working on this issue, and we held a demonstration at the Democratic Party convention on the eve of the convention, and it was around, many of the demonstrations were around a whole range of issues, but ours was just around reproductive rights, the rights of trans people and Palestinian women. And we had about 1,500 people marching down Michigan Avenue in Chicago. I'm also I've been active for 10 years around housing issues, which may not be such a problem in Ukraine, I'm not sure, but which was a huge problem in a city like Detroit, which, even though it's called the Motor City, there's a lot of unemployment, a lot of disability, people on disability. It's a black city, that is, it's about 75% African American, and it's a very poor city. The surrounding area is very wealthy because that's where the auto executives live and many of the engineers, but the city itself is a very poor one. And so we fought around housing issues. I would say the two biggest consistent demonstrations, or consistent, demonstrations. I don't want to say movement, because a movement implies coalitions and meetings, and this is more spontaneous than that. were the Black Lives Matter movement, which was very big across the whole United States and I guess internationally, and the Palestinian movement. As somebody who supports Ukrainian self-determination, I've tried to take slogans to the demonstration of from Ukraine to Palestine, occupation is a crime, and have been well received around that. I will say that there's been a tremendous repression around Palestine on the campuses. Many of the students held at the end of the spring term encampments. They set up tents. They organized teach-ins. And it was really great. I participated in two, one at the University of Michigan, which is about 45 minutes from where I live, and the other at Wayne State campus, which is right in Detroit. And just like the student movement of the 1960s, it was a very educational movement where there were constant artists creating art, teach-ins. It was very invigorating. In fact, when I was a part of the student movement in the 60s, I always felt that there was much more education in the encampments and the teach-ins than in the classrooms, and I certainly felt that this time around. However, the encampments were, by and large, broken up by the police, campus police and often city police. In some cases, the students ended the encampment because they were about to go off for the summer. But at University of Michigan, it existed for a month and was shut down. And today, there are 11 people, students and community members, who are facing felony charges because of the role that they played in the encampment. And interestingly enough, those charges were not brought by the local city attorney general. He, in fact, declined to bring the charges, but they went to the state attorney general and asked the state attorney general to bring these charges. So right away you can smell this is a political situation. And in fact, I would say the regents who supposedly run the university are quite part of the corporate establishment and have been outraged that the students would dare to question the investments that the university has. Because one of the big questions on the campuses is to get rid of the investments that these universities hold. For example, at Wayne State, they have investments in 2 Israeli banks, but also investments in things like Caterpillar, that has their big machines in Israel. And of course, one big investment is with Chevron, an oil company that's helping the Israelis develop the oil fields in the Gulf. So right now, the situation is incredibly difficult. When I go to the Wayne State campus, if I go for a film night, there's a police presence on campus. There are universities, including Columbia University, who have fired tenured professors. That is, professors who are not supposed to be fired unless they have some problem with the students or research or whatever. And in some cases, they just fire them because they felt like firing them. There's no due process involved at all. And there's a mood over the campuses. And I would say, I went to the Board of Governors, which governs Wayne State, where the students got up and spoke about divesting. And the students had done a lot of research. They had a 20-page paper about all the investments that they had clearly done their research. And the governors really just weren't even interested in listening to them. They had to listen to them, but just barely. And at the University of Michigan, another thing that they've done is since the Supreme Court ruled that essentially affirmative action was not constitutional, many campuses and corporations have instituted diversity, equity, and equality, DEI, as a way of reaching out to undervalued students of color. And at the University of Michigan, they fired the director on the basis that she had gone to the encampment and tried to negotiate with the students when they were facing problems with the police, with the campus police. So these are the problems that exist on campus. But I think they reflect the situation that we face now. And I'll just try to end by saying I see 3 issues as really important for socialists and social movement activists to be involved with right now. One is the issue of immigration. and we can talk more about that. The second is the firing of the federal workers. Enormous numbers of federal workers have been fired. These are the majority of the workforce in the United States is organized into unions in the public sector. And the private sector, where I work, only about 9% of the population who works is in a union. But in a public sector job, if you're a teacher or you work for the state or the federal government, chances are 50% of the time you're in a union. So the firing of these workers is really an attack on the unions. And I'm glad to see that the federal workers are beginning to fight back. Even though their union has been quite of a milquetoast union, nonetheless, a couple of weeks ago, 20,000 workers joined the union because they realized their only chance of winning their job back is if they fight together. And the third issue, which I already mentioned, is the issue on campus of the incredible repression at the university level that exists. That it's amazing to me, having gone through the student movement of the 60s and the 70s, to see it back again, but at a much higher level. There's a much more intense desire to punish people who have the audacity to speak out. And that's why, of course, the resistance movement is very important. And I'm seeing the beginning signs of it, but obviously this is going to take us a while. So I'll stop there and we can have some questions and discussion about one or another aspects that I've raised or that you're interested in talking about.
Thank you, Diane. Anybody got a question? Denise, maybe? Yeah, please.
I just don't understand why they fired a teacher in University of Columbus.
Columbus? Columbia University?
Why did they fire him?
Often because they said that the teacher had gone out to the encampment and or in some cases, maybe they had expressed some support for the Palestinian movement in an email that went out through the campus email. So these are really free speech issues that you'd think that the university, especially universities who came through the 50s and fired people that were supposedly communists, and then later realized, oh, that was a bad thing to do, and now they're doing it again. Everything depends on states. Even voting depends on states. So yes, the legislature sets rules at the different state level. Although I would say that the president we have now is determined to, there's federal funding that's given to universities and even public schools that comes through the federal government, comes through the state, and then is administered. And he's threatening to cut that off to programs that he doesn't like. For example, some cities are called sanctuary cities. And we say, we will not allow our police to help immigration arrest and deport people. And so President Trump says, well, I'm just gonna cut off funds to any cities or states that have that position. So there's the use of the federal purse to try to intimidate local governments around that. So intimidation exists on many different levels.
Mm-hmm. Okay, did you rise in America, in Michigan?
Did we?
Did you rise and born in America?
Where have you been raised?
Oh, I was born in San Francisco, California, and I've lived in several different cities. And I've lived in Detroit longer than I've lived in...
I remember San Francisco you mentioned.
Yes.
Do you think feminism is still necessary in America, and why?
Oh, well, of course it's necessary. And I think even after the revolution, it will be necessary. We need to have self-determination. And so I think power dynamics is really an important area. We were talking before about sexual harassment. But I think unless you have a feminist movement that brings a feminist perspective to every area of activity, it'll just go by people. Oh, that's just the way things have been done. So yes, I think feminism is something that is, just like I think that same is true about Black liberation, that even after a revolution, even after the abolishment of a system based on profit, we'll still need an autonomous movement to help us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I have a question. Денис, пожалуйста. Да?
Хорошо.
Okay, it's a very broad. So, how did you end up in a union and the socialist movement in the US? And also, like a sub-question, are there any feminist agenda in the union movement in the USA right now? And in what is it, if yes?
Well, you end up in a union by basically getting a job where there is a union. It's very difficult to organize where there is no union because the company has many different tricks and hires a very fancy company to try to prevent people from joining a union, like Amazon. Huge number of people work for Amazon and want to be part of a union, but they're intimidated and so forth. So you asked the question, how did I join a union? Well, I became an auto worker, and in the auto industry, that's not true so much now because so much of the auto industry has moved south, where there are, quote, right-to-work laws, which we call right-to-work for less laws. So I was active in my union, and actually there are women's committees in many of the unions. And I would say my biggest issues that I brought up in the union were the fight for the Equal Rights Amendment. At a federal level, we have no equal rights. It's not in the Constitution. It hasn't been interpreted in the Constitution. So there was a huge movement in the 80s to add that. And we actually it almost passed, but it didn't quite. We have a state equal rights amendment, but not a federal one. So another issue was the issue of breastfeeding in the plants. You know, women go back to work when they're like 6 weeks after they've had their child. And I would find women in the bathroom trying to breastfeed. And feed the baby, you know. They would pump the milk so they would have it, you know, for later. I mean, why is this happening this way? Shouldn't they have a special room that they go to? Well, there's been a whole movement since then. But in the 90s, that was that was just a beginning movement. So childcare, there are very few places to have children that are when you're working. I did a survey in my plant. I asked everybody who took care of children under the age of 18, both men and women, because in my particular plant, only 20% were female. The other 80% were men. Okay. But I asked everybody, and in the United States, because of the problem of drugs, many grandparents are taking care of their grandchildren because their children are just not capable of doing that. Okay, so I asked everybody, and what I found was that people have one backup. If their child isn't in school for some reason, they have one backup, but then they might not have a second backup. Or your child is disabled, and you have to be there at 3:30 to pick your child up, or the child is sitting there, you know. So what do you do if you're told you have to work overtime? So these were all questions that after I did that survey, I felt, and our women's committee did the survey, I look around the job and I realize these people are heroes, that what they have to do with their lives to ensure the quality of their children's care is really amazing, you know. And of course, women bear the greater proportion of the burden, but men are involved in childcare too. So we tried to see if we could get the company to have a childcare center. And we got it as part of the negotiations, but partly because we didn't have any women on the negotiating team. Guess what? That was one of the first demands that went. So we were never able to get one. But at one point, I got threatened with being fired, and kind of a funny story. So they couldn't possibly fire me for what I did. I picketed the administration building on my own time. So there's nothing they could do to fire me. Okay, so they brought me over to the headquarters, and they had the head of relations, the head of human relations sitting opposite me. And he says, yeah, well, asked me why I had done that, and I explained. He said, well, the problem with you guys is you never come to work. And I said, I come to work all the time. And he said, yeah, but not you, but all the others. And I said, you know, the average age in this plant is 34 years old. That means most people have children. And they might have one backup, but if they don't have a second backup, they're going to stay home and take care of their child instead of coming to work. Why don't you have a child care center for people whose maybe their kids are slightly sick or they need a place to stay, and everybody who has a child can have so many vouchers for that. And suddenly, his secretary, she pops up. Well, that would be great for her. And the human relations guy said, well, we don't have that. I said, well, I'm not against your having that too, you know. So just a lack of realization of what are the problems that people face, and women especially, and how can we care for that. So I think there is a women's group, Coalition for Labor Union Women, that I belong to, that women from many different unions belong to in the United States. I would say it's not a very radical union at this point, not a very radical group at this point, but at least it exists, and there is some knowledge that that women trade unionists have some different issues than male trade unionists, and they need to be addressed. That's also true for the Civil Rights Committee. So these are important institutions that I think socialists should, when we are in the union, should champion and get us to work on these issues.
Well, to pick up this line about the necessity to specifically, yes, have the interests of women workers and women unionists. Yes, so I recall the situation of early 20th century when the most dispossessed, most feminized, because it was less paid, yes, jobs in the US were mostly taken by immigrant women, and many of them led like the class struggles, like Clara Lemlich, who was a Ukrainian Jew, or Rose Schneiderman, who was a Polish Jew, so mainly Eastern European migrants, yes. But still, as I know, in their unions, respective unions, like International Ladies Garment Workers, yes, Union, the leading posts were occupied by men, yes, and still it was very disproportionate, yes. You have female membership and most militant people being women, but still it's dominated by men. What's the situation today in the general trade union movement in the US? And also, even more general question, so how do you evaluate the dynamic of the workers' movement today? Because it seemed to be like almost dying after all this Reagan neoliberal, yes, dismantling of the unions. But then you had these outbursts like the teachers' strikes, again the automobile workers protesting and striking. So do you see this potential of growth of this union militancy, or there are these too much obstacles for it now?
Well, I really see the union movement as key because we're organized, and we may be small. You know, if you look at it's only 10% of the population, but nonetheless, it's 10% that's organized and capable of doing a great deal. So whether we will or not, it really remains to be determined. The public sector workers, aside from the teachers, has been a very quiet union. American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE. I mean, it's a nothing union, you know, but as I say, 20,000 people just joined it. So it's got to do something. And it was the federal workers that started with their signs showing up at the offices that Musk and his people had invaded and taken over and fired all these people. So one element within the public sector workers is the most militant. It's the teachers. And the teachers are really perfectly situated because they are organized as a union. But what's their constituency? Their constituency is the community. Their working conditions are the conditions that the children have. So they're always, the teachers have a responsibility. What happens if children don't have a home? If they're living in a shelter or they're living in a car? I mean, this is true for thousands of children in the United States. So they have fought around issues of trying to provide things that the children definitely need. I mean, these children are traumatized. So there have been struggles. The most important one is probably the Chicago Teachers Union, but also the Los Angeles Teachers Union that has fought not only for their own salaries and benefits, but also these working conditions. And as I say, I think they're perfectly suited because they reach out to the community. And they've also fought around school closings. In a lot of cases, schools are closed. They consolidate things in a very unfair way. So I would think that's where I would look to. It's got to be the public sector workers. As for my union, Yes, it's true. We carried out a very innovative strike. We had a strike, generally speaking, the strike that the UAW had been carried out as a very routine kind of strike. We pick a strike target, one of the big companies, and then we strike against that one and let the work go on at the other two. This time around, we struck at all three, but we didn't strike every single plant. We only took a couple of plants in each company. So the majority of people were working, and every week the president would announce, well, strike negotiations haven't been going so well at Ford, so we're going to pick a couple other Ford plants to strike at. So the strike would continue, and we were constantly putting pressure on the companies to negotiate with with the union and to negotiate against each other. So it was a very innovative strike, but I unfortunately, and this is true of a lot of unions, people think I belong to a union, so the union should do this for me. No, the union is us. We can't let just a couple of officials be the ones who are in charge of the union. It's not like it's a credit company or an insurance company. It involves all of us. Well, the problem is in America we've been too much banking on the officials to take everything in account for us, and we can't do that, especially not in the administration that we have in front of us today.
Okay, young lady, please.
Do you struggle with any prejudice as a socialist in the US? And if you do, which exactly prejudice do you struggle with?
Can you say that?
Prejudice.
Is there a prejudice against socialists? Yes, I think there is. So, in fact, every social movement has been important for socialists to be involved with, whether it was the anti-war movement or the feminist movement or the Black Lives Matter movement or the union movement itself. So what's important is that as socialists, we should, not in a sectarian way, say, I'm a socialist, I know everything, but to bring our ideas and our organizing strategy. So I'm involved in a group called DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. It's much larger than Solidarity, my organization. Well, as a socialist, I wear many hats. I'm a trade unionist. So what is my job in DSA? My job in DSA is to help people know how to organize. What amazes me is they don't know what to do. So around immigration, first I had to go to the chapter and explain to them that this is going to become an important issue, and here's what we could do. And finally, I have a working group that's organized, and the person in charge of the working group, he's very young. He doesn't know how to do anything, and so I have to say to him, so he got this big long list. He says, I got to call all these people. I said, no, you don't have to call all these people. Think of who else on the committee could help you. Don't do it all yourself. So what I want to do is I want to be known as the person who has good ideas, not just intellectual ideas, but how do we organize a campaign? And it's that way that I think that socialists bring something to the movement and encourage other people to become socialists too. What power does a union have in the private sector?
Yeah.
Well, you don't have very much power as one individual, because it's true, you can be replaced. But as a group, you have a lot of power, because how can he operate without us? And so we have the power of our working or not working, or deciding that things need to be looked at much more carefully, and therefore the production goes down. So we have a lot of control over the operations of that plant. Now, I would say, what's the difference between a company that's a union company and the company that's not a union company? Generally, especially in the auto sector, which is a relatively high-paying sector, there's not that much difference in the wages, but where there is a lot of difference is in the working conditions. And that's, I think, key, that when you're working, you're not just working for your salary, you're working for your health. And what's the toxicity of the place you work in? How safe is it for you to work there? So those are really important issues. Another important issue, and this is something that really needs to be changed, but this is how it exists now. Okay, I work at a job and I also get a pension. So I actually don't think that that's the way it should be. I think that we have Social Security. I think Social Security should be adequate enough so you don't need a pension. But in the United States, they say it's three stools, three legs on a stool. The first is your savings, the second is your pension, and the third is Social Security. Well, it used to be that almost during the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, most unions workers had pensions. But now that's not happening. Now they're asking you to have a 401k, which means you put some money aside. So one of those stools one of the legs on that stool has just been weakened. So I think there should be more public services in the United States. For example, I think there should be public housing and social housing. I think there should be public health. I think one of the most severe problems that we have in the United States is that people who do not have health care. I'm fortunate. I'm over 65, so I get a coverage from the state for being over 65 for my health care, and I have my job pays for my health care. So I have two health cares, but some people have none. And they can be, the reason that people lose their houses is often because of health care. So it's a big problem because healthcare in the United States is very expensive. So that's kind of the long way around your question, but it raised a number of issues for me. I think being in a union job gives you a certain security, and if we handled it correctly, so we began to think about how can we work together as a union? What are the campaigns that we can have? I think in the auto industry, I've never been for private cars. Even though I live in a city which doesn't have public transportation and I have a private car, I believe in public transportation. I believe in making it free and absolutely accessible for everybody. And how can we, finding ways that we can eliminate the need for cars? Yeah, we'll have a few cars, so that if you're going away on a vacation, maybe you can put in to get a card for a week or two. But other than that, we should live in a society where we have public access to really good transportation of all kinds.
Well, thank you, Diane, and thank you. That was a nice question, really. I believe you had a question, and then and then Kaina. Thank you.
Well, I think it happens. It happens in a lot of places around the same time, really, because as you can say with the bourgeois revolutions and at least the idea that we're equal as human beings, women sort of think, yeah, I'm a human being. I should be equal too. I should learn to read. I should learn to go to school. And so that happens whether it's in Greece or Turkey or the United States or wherever. So I think we have many feminist forebearers who are who are making those demands in the 19th century. So I think there's probably pre-feminists, because when I think of the women who fought against their own slavery before the Civil War in the United States, people like Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth are very important because they did not accept slavery and they did something about it. And Harriet Tubman actually led an army division during the Civil War. So I think it's can I say, natural impulse? I think as we begin to see ourselves as human beings, women also begin to see ourselves as human beings. So that I think it's Sarah and Angelina Grimke, who were the children of slave owners, and they came north to Philadelphia in the 19th century. And one of them said, "What I want is for the man to take his heel off my neck." So I think that's just a general desire, and it happens as a bourgeois education develops. But I think it also happens as women in their own societies begin to see themselves as begin to have confidence in themselves and take some decision, like Sojourner Truth or Angela Grimke or one of the other feminists did.
Thank you. Well, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I have two questions actually. The first one, I suppose, really short. Would you consider that more or less women consider themselves feminists now than they did, well, I'm not sure about the exact time, but before, let's say, maybe it was before.
And the second one?
And the second one is a little bit more complex. Would you consider it's better to have many different feminist movements, right? Like separate feminist initiatives, or like unite them basically with some like overarching
One centralized initiative.
Basically, yeah. Would you consider like how? Basically, is it better when the movement is divided into like different tasks or united under like one big group?
So it's like that.
I tend to be for a more integrated movement when that's possible, and I think the fight around reproductive freedom is good in that sense because it does involve not just women who see themselves as women, but trans people, you know, gay, lesbian. So it has a broader framework. Actually, I mentioned the demonstration that we had at the Democratic Party convention, and originally it was just going to be about reproductive freedom, including trans folks. And I brought up, I just don't think we can have a demonstration in Chicago on the eve of the Democratic Party convention where we don't bring up the Palestine issue. And so we had a discussion about it, and it turned out everybody was for it. I was a little worried about it, but everybody was for it, and it worked out really well. It seems to me that it is a more integrated movement that we've had in the past. And I think that feminism, the issue of reproductive freedom, the right to one's own body, it really does mean dealing with the question of sexual violence. So it seems to me that feminism is a kind of broader issue. So I think certainly in the Palestinian movement, it's been important for me to raise the issue of Ukraine, which is not as much talked about in the movement, partly because some people only see that there's one imperialism. We live in the United States, which has done all these horrible things to everybody all over the world. And people don't realize, yes, but there are other imperialisms in the world. And if you lived in Ukraine, you wouldn't necessarily see the U.S. as the one that's most hanging over your life, you know. And so how can you be so narrow? And I know I've had many discussions with people, and I think that it's true. I believe in the Ukrainian right of self-determination, just like I believe in anybody's right of self-determination. I also understand that there's geopolitics involved, but that does not engage the right of self-determination. And those people who only see geopolitics, it's like they forget that there are human beings who are faced with a decision. And so I think trying to integrate Palestine and Ukraine, not demanding that of the movement, but going to the movement with those demands has been a good experience and teaches other people how to work in a collaborative way, whereas maybe you don't always agree. As the question about feminism, I'm not sure how, there's such a anti-feminist perspective, especially in the White House right now. And J.D. Vance, even though his wife is a very successful lawyer, he really believes that women belong at home and that we should be having children. It's almost like they want us to take us back to the 1950s. I do not believe that there are many women in the United States who want to be taken back to the 1950s. Yes, it's true among some evangelical people, but that's a minority. It does not reflect the majority of women who want to be full human beings, and that means a complete life.
So we found a time period which Mega considers the time when America was great, 1950s in the repeat. Okay, well, that is something. Karina, please.
In your opinion, why did Trump manage to gain support of the majority of the American population, and what were the mistakes that the progressive activists made?
Our system is set up to reward the conservative perspective. So our Constitution is very narrow. Our voting rights are very narrow. Millions of people don't vote because they can't vote, and billions of people don't vote because they don't think there's anything to vote for. We only have 2 political parties that have the right to be on the ballot. And I've been a supporter of many different small parties, most of which haven't survived. The Green Party, yes, it survived and it is able to be on the ballot in some states, but it's never able to debate the major politicians, and especially because there's an incredible amount of money that goes into these campaigns. If you don't have $1 billion, how can you run for president? You know, so that's a big problem. So why did people vote for Trump? Majority of people voted for Trump because for the last 30 years we've had neoliberal administrations in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and people were looking for something else. And Trump represents something else. He said he was going to bring down the cost of eggs, which I think were $3 a dozen around last November, and when I last looked, are $8 a dozen. So he hasn't done it, but he said he would, and people believe that he would at least try. So it's a superficial explanation, but I remember when I was a kid, my stepfather said, Eisenhower is going to win because people think he's a good neighbor. Now, what does being a good neighbor have to do with being president? Well, it doesn't have anything to do with it, but it's like the mindset, you know? So I think of Trump as kind of like the bad neighbor. Trump is the guy who said, "You're fired." And so people kind of like that, you know? Oh, it's funny. Well, now we've got the guy in office. So, but I think they voted for him because they saw him as an alternative. Unfortunately, he's an alternative who is breaking everything up. Will we survive? That's going to be quite difficult. But and I think that he was elected because of the economy and not for other issues. I will say, why was the Democratic Party so bad? Well, again, it's a neoliberal party. The Democratic Party had a decision to make in 2016. It could have allowed Bernie Sanders to run for president on their ticket. Now, Bernie Sanders actually isn't a Democrat. He's actually an independent, but he was running in the Democratic Party. But I knew they would never allow Bernie Sanders to win the nomination. But if he had won, he has a social democratic perspective. That would have been another perspective. Now, I'm not saying he would have brought everything great to America, but I'm saying that he offered a perspective on the progressive side, and Trump offered a perspective on the "you're fired" side. And when one was eliminated, I think that helped bring Trump into being. So he has, I would say, a third of the population who are evangelicals, right-wing evangelicals. So the question is, how does he get to that next over-the-top percentage? And that was by very cleverly using the economy against Biden. There was one point at which, during the pandemic, they were giving money to every family, a certain amount of money for every child, to every family. During that period, it was started under Trump, but it existed under Bush. Child poverty in that 1 year was reduced in half. And I thought, if they continue this policy, that would really change the United States. But of course, Biden cut off that policy. And I think the fact that he cut off that policy was a sign to people of how little the Democratic Party cared about them. So I think those were the elements that allowed Trump to win.
Thank you.
Denise, then a young gentleman.
Yeah, I still have the half of the question about how relevantly women are now represented in the union movement, and also in continuation of what you have described. So now you have this ultra-reactionary administration that actually is doing the program that is opposite to what has to be done. Yes, and they entitled the richest capitalist in the world to actually destroy even that scarce social security, even that scarce public education, even that scarce Medicaid, yes, to destroy it completely and privatize. Yes, you have people who are literally, like now you described, firing everyone from air traffic dispatchers, yes, to controllers, to people in the national parks, and they blame them that these are the parasites, these are state parasites, and this guy, yes, who is the richest guy in the world because he has state contracts, government contracts, yes, so he is this genuine defender of the people against the elites. So who are the elites in this? So I see this as a probably the worst assault on humanity since Nazism, fascism back in the 30s and 40s. Yes, because their program is essentially, yes, to makes everyone pay for them being even more enormously rich than they were in this proper, like old neoliberalism. This is neoliberalism on steroids, what they propose. And it seems that, though you described there are these pockets of resistance, yes, protests, but still, majority of the people are shocked. Yes, they don't organize, they don't go to the streets, they don't try to find ways how to stop this administration. So, what do you think? How many time we still have to act in order for them not to turn this into this nightmare, this authoritarian, completely dictatorship situation?
Well, I see right now is like there's two sides to this. There's the dog-eat-dog side, which is what Trump is representing, and Musk and Vance. Even if you allow anybody to get in the line, any immigrant to come into this country, they're taking the food out of your kid's mouth. This is the dog-eat-dog approach. Okay, what is our approach? Our approach has to be, we are in this together. We are human beings. We can make a better society. We can stand together. It's only when we stand together that we can change things. So, to me, this is the teaching in the United States that's going on right now. And we're small forces at this point, those who say this and those who have a sense of resistance against so many people who are absolutely traumatized. And their first response is, what do I have to do, So for me, the question of immigrants is a really important question. We have 11 million immigrants in the United States who are undocumented. That means that they're liable to be thrown out of the country. Although there are many, many categories. For instance, there's temporary protective status, so that there are 17 countries that have that status because of climate change or war happening. That's how Ukrainians can get status in the United States. It's also how Haitians get status. It's how Afghanis get status. So those people are in our country able to work because they have this temporary status, which is renewed every 12 to 18 months. Well, Trump went after them, both Trump and Vance. I don't know if you heard the story about there's this Haitian community in Springfield, Ohio. They were invited to come there because there's a factory that hired them. So they are living there, and they're accused of eating dogs and cats. And they're accused of being, in other words, they're criminals. They're not even human beings eating animals. They're here illegally. They should leave. Well, all of this is untrue. So it's how, again, this dog-eat-dog world versus the community that we have to worry about. Okay, so my approach has been, for example, in DSA, to try to get people to say, okay, whether you're in a union or not, what are you doing? How are you talking to your coworkers, to your community about these issues? For example, if ICE comes to your factory or your office, what do you have to do? What does the employer have to do or not have to do? Well, if you've had political discussions, whether it's a union job or a non-union job, and you say the role that you must play is in a public space. Yes, ICE, we call them ICE. ICE has the right to come, but they don't have the right to come to your private space, to your office, to your factory. And even when they come, if they don't have a signed court order, they're not allowed. If they have a signed court order, it's for a person. All right, but you as the employer don't have to say, oh, that's Juan Gonzalez, So there are lots of things that you can do, but you have to be together in order to be able to do this. So what we're trying to do is to teach people how you can protect your coworkers. There are other things we're trying to do in terms of mutual aid, but we have to teach people to act. And that's something that Americans are not particularly, haven't done in years. So it's going to take a while, how soon this will take off. I don't know, but it's clear there are contradictions. If the tariffs are initiated against Canada and Mexico, it will have a big impact. I live 5 minutes from Canada. The bridge has 19,000 trucks that go over it every day because the auto industry in Canada and the auto industry in Detroit are integrated. They go, each car that's produced, the parts come from 7 different places, 7 different, so it's an integrated economy. To try to break that up will have a big impact on Michiganders as well as on the people in Canada. So how will the government be able to deal with those contradictions? It's unclear. Clearly, Trump is a bully. How do bullies get contained? Well, they don't get contained if you lie on the floor and say, "Oh, yes, sir, ma'am. Yes, sir, go ahead and do that." Only when you confront them. So finding the ways of confronting them, whether you're President Zelensky or a U.S. citizen or an immigrant, is resistance. And how can we do it the best together? That's really the key. And we don't really know, because this has never happened to us before. Why hasn't it happened to us before? Because we are now in late capitalism. And it's a different dynamic. We've had this neoliberalism that's gone on for 30 or 40 years. It seems to be coming to an end. So it's as if the questions, both at the climate level and at the level of our countries, is, are we able to come together and make a change that comes from our making decisions ourselves? Or are we going to succumb and just feel, okay, there's nothing we can do about it? Well, I think the people in this room want to do something about it. So we have to be, investigators and organizers and help other people come to those conclusions, because there's no way out of it. I think for many of us, our parents or our grandparents were able to avoid these political questions, but especially given the interrelationship of the climate crisis with the economic and political crisis that we're going in now, there is no other way than to confront and defeat the far right. It's a big task we've got.
Thank you. The floor is yours.
My question is, how Americans react to creation of DOGE, Department of Financial Control. I forgot how it.
Efficiency. Government efficiency.
Yeah, DOGE and the appointing Elon Musk as executive of this strange creation, because Musk wasn't elected at all. He isn't affiliated with the party. He never had a political or former government job, and now he Yermak appointed as a advisor and the guy who decides which policy should be cancelled or which part of government should be cut funding, and he accepts the some $1 million contract to build Teslas with a machine gun on top of it, and not cutting this thing, because it's totally wasting the budget that need to be used to, I don't know, bring X to the normal price and gas to its former glory.
That's a nice question.
It's sort of like, do you ever watch Saturday Night Live?
I watch.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, if it weren't reality, it would be just terribly funny.
Yeah.
But the fact is, it's reality. Many years ago, I heard a writer who wrote comic novels named Philip Roth. And he said, it's very hard to be a comic writer in the United States, because if you read the headlines, it's already funny. And that was in 1960, and it's gotten even funnier. So these are the contradictions. I think that many people are appalled. Now, there are a few who say, "Oh, that's very funny. Yeah, just like TV." I read a story in the New York Times yesterday saying that some of the Ukrainians who live in Brighton Beach thought what Trump and Vance did last Friday wasn't so bad because they want peace. And you think, oh, what crazy guys,
Because they are rich, conservative shitheads.
Right, okay. So, there's always a few, but I think the majority of people must be really appalled. And I think the majority of people must feel really that it's inappropriate what Trump and Vance and Rubio did. And it was disgusting when I read that it was at Fox News or someone said, you know, why aren't you coming in a suit to Zelensky? And I thought that he gave a very good answer, that I'll wear a suit after the war is over, but that I want to identify with the soldiers, the Ukrainian soldiers who are on the front. I thought that was a very honorable answer. And I think that many people will see that. So you can say the chickens are coming home to roost now. You know, unfortunately, we don't have a way of pulling the emergency brake and saying, all right, this experiment is over. But I think that, and I don't think that we should rely on the courts, although the American Civil Liberties Union and many organizations are flying one suit after another to try to stop this. It's interesting that these are the people who always lecture us about law and order. We should obey the law and order and not fight for any kind of change, right? But when they're in charge, they decide, oh, well, the civil rights laws, we're going to ignore those. You know, then they turn out to be hypocrites, and I think they become revealed. And so I think that even though it's shocking that this is the situation that we're facing. Now, I didn't answer the question about women as active in the trade unions. Yes, there are women leaders of some of the trade unions, but I must say that just having a woman as the head of the AFL-CIO is a woman, and I don't think she's particularly bad, but she isn't particularly good either. There are some women leaders of unions who are much better than that, but I think it's really can you organize a union that is militant and that will fight, and that's the job. And I think in a lot of cases the union officials just think their job is to get the contract or to get the best deal that's possible. And I think that's certainly not enough.
Well, the suit situation is a great example of an extraordinary of Trump's mindset, because in one meeting he firstly said that he loved the suit, then he said it was a great disrespect, and in the same time he regularly hosts Musk in the Oval Office, you know, with the t-shirt, jeans, and the jacket on top of it, and he's okay with it. But you know, you understand. What I remembered, there was one union leader that shockingly supported Trump for president, and even he was at the Republican National Convention. Do you know anything about him, about this union?
Well, it's the Teamsters Union, and it's a very important union. It's the and I would say that he has been quite militant in terms of getting contracts. So in a way, he's just what I talked about, somebody who tries to get a good union contract, the best that he can negotiate. And I think that's how he saw it. He knew Trump was going to be elected. So he said to himself, what's the best position that I can be in? Well, it's in a position where Trump has to at least pretend that he goes along with me. And in fact, because Sean O'Brien suggested that, I can't remember, the new person who will be the head of Secretary of Labor is a person that he suggested be put in charge there. So he sees himself as somebody who can mitigate what Trump is doing. Mm-hmm. So that's a position that there's a long tradition in American unionists of people who feel you just do the best you can. And that's what he thought he was doing, the best he could. I think it was a mistake, and I think there are many of his members who don't agree with him. But you have to understand that many trade unionists did vote for Trump. In my union, it's estimated that 40% voted for Trump. Now, I met people on the picket line who said they were voting for Trump. So I know they exist. And I think the same thing was true in the Teamsters Union. Again, in America, individualism is very highly valued, I make my decisions. I live my life. I decide this and that. And there's not an understanding that we're part of a whole community, So I think that mitigates that unless your union is mobilized to have another perspective, then you're just as asleep as any other American.
Dennis, then Bill.
Yeah, also, but by the way, there's like an observation on European states that the share of the working class people who vote for the far right is growing. However, those who are active in the organized labor, they are mostly very anti-far right. So they still support the left, and they are leftist activists. So this I think also like corresponds. If you don't have a militant and organized and leftist workers movement, yes, then the workers are open for being consumed by these people whose interests are directly opposite to theirs. Yeah, but they present as changes. And as you described, I also recall that there was this guy, Tom Lehrer, who was a mathematician who also wrote satiric songs. And then when Henry Kissinger was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, he said, there is no need for satire anymore. Yeah, so the life is much more absurd. And now you see that every time life can make even more absurd, more best satire in our life, unfortunately. Yes, because it's really playing with human lives. I wanted to come back to your experience in the anti-war movement, as you mentioned that you started in the protest against Vietnam War. And the war in Vietnam was stopped mostly due to the sacrifice that was made by the Vietnamese people, yes, by their stance and by them continuing the resistance and that offensive and everything, yes, but the US peace anti-war movement, it played a role, yes, in reshaping the public opinion and in general. Now when we have this Russian invasion of Ukraine, unfortunately there is no active peace movement there. It was crushed in Russia from the scratch. Yeah, but how do you recall your own maybe experience when you were still faced at these initial stages of the war, when lots of people were saying you are traitors, or possibly maybe something that was this conservative playbook and now is used unfortunately by many on the campus left, but this smaller, weaker side cannot win. Yeah, so why do you support this continuing the carnage? Let them capitulate finally. Yes, this is what Ukrainians hear often. And why do you still try to resist? It's obvious you cannot win, so you need to subdue to this bigger and stronger power. So what was your answer at that point? How to counter this position that still you need, like the powerful will win, so you need to stop resistance and you need just to accommodate to the things they are, realpolitik?
The question is very interesting because I was from the point of view of the imperialist power and not from the point of view of the Vietnamese. So for me, it was simply that we had to withdraw. I mean, it was just no question about it. Now, there was actually another position in the anti-war movement, negotiations now. And we said, negotiate. What would you negotiate over? The size of the table? You know, I mean, it just, actually, that was the position of the Communist Party. They did negotiate for a couple of years before they actually withdrew, but the negotiations never went anywhere. So it would seem to me that, and you know this better than I do, that treaties have been signed between Ukraine and Russia and the United States. They just never were lived up to. So why would this next treaty? You got the treaty when the nuclear weapons were withdrawn. You got another treaty. So treaties are no sign that anything good would happen. So I think you have to say it will not resolve the situation. Just like we said, it will not resolve the situation. So negotiations is not enough. It's a false start. Now I used to be a pacifist. So every time there was a escalation of the war, I would go to Times Square. I lived in New York at that time. I would go to Times Square with a group of people, other pacifists, and sit down and protest. And of course, we would be hauled away to the jail. And my boss said he was glad that one of the cops had injured me. So it was true at that time that the majority was very harsh towards those of us who demonstrated. But later on, my boss apologized to me and realized that I had been right. He had a PhD and I surely didn't. But that was also an interesting process. You know, people never give up on people. You know, people do change. And how can we get the American population to understand the need to stand with Ukraine? I think it's very difficult. I think the majority of people want to, but I think they don't know how. And I wish the Ukrainian American population was stronger and did more outreach than they do. There is a Ukrainian population in my neighborhood, in my Metro Detroit area, but they're so they did do demonstrations at the beginning, and it was really great to see all those Ukrainian flags and the trucks and the people out there, and there were Russians who came too, but that hasn't been true in a long time. They do a lot of, I think, mutual aid, but within their churches, so they haven't demonstrated. Although I was glad to see that there were some demonstrations on the 3rd anniversary, I believe in Washington, D.C. and in New York, within the Ukrainian community.
Yeah, my question is basically opposite of the previous question, because, well, in Ukraine, right, we don't have any massive pushback against like women's rights and stuff. Unlike in America right now, yeah. But also, like, obviously, they're not perfect, right? And my question is how to prevent complacency in progressive movement when things appear good enough, basically, before it becomes like too late and harder to.
Well, this is a difficult question because I feel that's the situation in Michigan right now, whereas most women feel abortion is accessible, so why do I need to worry? And actually, there are some small Black groups who have raised the issue, as have some larger groups around. The United States has a very high infant mortality and maternal mortality rate. I mean, you would be shocked that it is higher than many countries in the world. And one of the reasons it's so high is because we don't have a healthcare system that's a public healthcare system. So for women who have a child and become depressed or have some health issues, after 3 months, their healthcare coverage is cut off. And now some states are increasing that to a whole year of healthcare coverage because so many women have died. The other element is that the institution of health is itself very sexist, and there have been studies that were done on Blacks, for example, that were done in the 1950s that today are seen as utterly racist. So the racism and sexism within the healthcare field has prevented people from seeing, or even a Black woman will go and say, I'm having this problem, and the doctor will just dismiss it, not consider it serious. So you have all these problems, and yet they're seen as individual problems rather than social issues. And so how do you get people to see that these are social issues? Well, one good way is through some of the discussions that have come up since Roe v. Wade was overturned. And I've been really impressed by the work of some of the journalists around this that have revealed just how difficult the issues of pregnancy and sexual harassment also. So maybe part of the answer is we have various social movements, so that right now, I think in the United States, abortion is not in the forefront of the movement. Maybe issues of sexual harassment are more, the violence against women are more, and the issues of Palestinian women and immigrant women are more central. So that's another way of trying to deal with it, not in a focused way necessarily, but just answering the need of that moment. A difficult question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just continue this topic of medical system in the United States, and it's not only not affordable and ineffective, but it's also extremely expensive and overpriced. Yes, so it's made some incredible share of the GDP and so on. And being in New Orleans, for example, asking people in Louisiana, I understand that some people consider this insurance so expensive and covering so little that they do not believe Democrats with all this Obamacare, Medicare, and so programs, because they feel like, you know, they will receive some insurance, but co-payments would be big. And, you know, to compare with Ukraine, I had a good insurance from the university. By co-payments was certainly several times higher than paying for private doctor in Ukraine, for example. So it's, you can't imagine what it would be, of course, if it would be a full price. So, as I understand, the approach of Trump was to make it all cheaper. Yeah, and it had some. So some people really believe that maybe we should just make drugs cheap. Should make this medical service a little bit cheaper, and then we will not need any kind of insurance. Yeah, and now they are even organizing this affordability council. Yeah, like fighting this more monopoly and high prices probably for drugs and for some. So, to what extent it could work? So, to what extent this populist agenda of trying to regulate prices could really be effective, and So I hope that everybody in the United States will understand that Trump is evil for everybody soon, but I'm not sure. So, is it possible that these measures to regulate prices, to regulate affordability of some basic services, will win Trump a significant support and in the country? And could it be that he will maintain support for a long period of time? Generalizing, to what extent we face the threat that Trump will build a real fascist dictatorship in the United States based on mass support of American citizens. If you can.
Okay, thank you, Zahar. I think it is our last question that we have time for official part, and after that we can, engage in an informal way with Diane and Monica, all of us. Please.
Well, the problem in the United States is that both the Democrats and the Republicans, and I think Trump also, don't want to give everyone health care. So it's always a question of how low a bar you have. So if you say, okay, we're going to take care of the 5% of the poorest people, but you give them really shitty care, but it only affects 5% of the population. So you can get away with it. So this has been the problem in our country. That's why you have to be for universal coverage, universal health care, universal free public transportation, universal social housing. All of these things are things we need as human beings. And to say only one element, and they always say, oh, well, that's because the rich people, they don't need it. Yeah, but if the rich people don't need it, that's okay. But if only the poor people get it, they'll do it in a incorrect way. I went to Sweden once, and I lived I stayed in a public housing unit. And when I came back, and I told people about it, and they said, well, were there toilet covers on the seats in the bathroom? And I realized that what they were really saying is, was it really crappy? Was it a really crappy apartment or not? And I said, no, it was a nice apartment because it was designed for not just the poorest people who are not seen as humans. And so I think that's how we have to approach healthcare or any other institution in the society. Now, actually, Trump wants to get rid of some of the regulations that Biden put for trying to regulate certain drugs to bring down the cost of those drugs. So I think there's a fight about that. And that's because the United States has chosen not to regulate the price of drugs. But even, for example, the U.S. owns the veteran system. And actually, that's a very good model. The United States has a veteran system where all veterans can come and get health care, a variety of care. If we had that for everybody, it would be basically a good public service system. But they're trying to privatize that as well. So I think always the argument of a universal system is the best way to raise these social issues.
Well, thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Не було питань. Thank you, guys. Until next time. So now for the informal part, you can have snacks here, have coffee, have tea. I will turn on some live music. So, yeah.